So you are still explaining yourself to them? Still reducing your life to bite-sized morsels that they may consume without choking on their own mediocrity. You continue to boil down your complexity into simple phrases, hoping that they would finally grasp why you move, think, and breathe differently. But here's the reality that will completely change your perspective on yourself right now. They already know. They've known from the moment you strolled into their space and altered the molecular structure of the room. They felt it in their bones. When your energy entered and disrupted their comfy little existence, like a faulty simulation. They've been researching you, recording your patterns, and attempting to decipher the frequency you function at since it doesn't yet exist within their restricted comprehension. What they won't acknowledge is this. They do not need your explanations. They need you to keep explaining so they can continue to pretend they don't know. You are working on a whole separate level of reality. It isn't misunderstanding that causes them to lean back when you speak or changes their tone when they address you. It's a combination of familiarity and something they can't put a name to. That unidentified thing is what keeps them up at 3 a.m., repeating discussions with you and attempting to comprehend why your presence feels like standing too close to controlled lightning. They've been pretending they don't notice how you absorb information differently, how you can see through their masks before they've ever adjusted them, how you react to problems using reasoning that should never work but always does. Each time you explain yourself, you are not teaching them. You're giving them fodder to pretend they comprehend something that is genuinely beyond their grasp. You're giving them labels that will allow them to categorize you as safe, sensitive, intense, or different, when what they truly mean is that you are the outlier who makes their whole worldview seem unstable. They want you to keep explaining so they can keep reducing you to something. Manage something that does not jeopardize their whole identity. Let's talk about what's actually going on when it seems like you're speaking a whole foreign language, and your words appear to bounce off their awareness without making an impact. You aren't failing to communicate. You are transmitting on a frequency that they can only partly receive, similar to attempting to stream video via dial-up internet. Your ideas travel between dimensions. They don't even have names for your emotions, which come in hues they've never seen. Your intuition receives up messages from unknown places. When you enter into a room, you do not only observe. You can download the complete emotional environment in seconds and interpret micro-expressions, energy changes, unspoken conflicts, and hidden agendas quicker than most individuals can remember their own identities. You're reading the metadata of human contact while they're still figuring out the surface-level script. That's why our talks seem different. Why do people either pull toward you like magnetic north or flee like you're radioactive? There is no middle ground with someone who works on your frequency. You either attune or step back. You've been slowing down your processing speed, dumbing down your ideas, and dividing your knowledge into bite-sized chunks so people can eat it without experiencing existential indigestion. But every time you do this, you are not only betraying yourself, you're denying them of the medication they need. Exposure to something that exceeds their present ability to comprehend your difference is not a communication issue. Evolution does not explain itself to the species it has left behind. They see you manage circumstances that would crush them and marvel how you're still alive. But they can't see the unseen building you've created inside yourself after years of misinterpretation. They do not understand how each rejection taught you to value yourself. However, betrayal provided you the blueprints for loyalty. How every minute of solitude becomes a lesson in self-sufficiency. You have completed advanced training at the University of Solitude, whilst others are still in kindergarten and seeking social recognition. The chasm between where you are and where they are cannot be articulated. It must be developed into. You know what exhausts you the most. It is not the difficulties you confront. It is the ongoing translation service you provide to folks who only speak surface language. Every day, you turn multifaceted discoveries into bland explanations, turning symphonies into ringtones, lowering seas to puddles, just so someone might say, "Oh, I get it now." But they do not grasp it. They have only gotten the simplified version, a children's book rendition of what is really going on within your awareness. You've grown so good at this translation that you've nearly forgotten what it's like to speak your original language and express yourself without filtering it through will. Do they comprehend this? You've been altering yourself in real time, removing the portions that can mislead people while also removing the elements that define you. Every interaction becomes a calculation, a careful balance of how much truth they can tolerate. How much of your true viewpoint can you disclose without their eyes glazing over? Or worse, witnessing the flash of panic that occurs when someone realizes they are speaking to something they cannot define. But what happens when you stop explaining? When you finish translating? When you quit lowering yourself to meet their comfort level? Something almost wonderful happens. Without having to say anything, the proper individuals learn to understand you. Those who are supposed to hear your frequency instantly tune in, while static from mismatched connections goes away. You morph into a lighthouse that only specific ships can see, and they will come to you. Not because you described your light, but because people were already looking for it. The tiredness you feel is not due to your differences. It stems from those who are determined to misinterpret anything that challenges their worldview and assume that difference requires justification, explanation, or acceptance. You're exhausted because you've been carrying the burden of making yourself palatable to individuals who were never intended to devour your energy in the first place. You've been providing accessibility for an audience that purchased tickets to a play they can't even enjoy. Then you wonder why you feel exhausted after each performance. Here's something that will dramatically change the way you see every contact from now on. They recognize you before you speak. There's something about the way you hold space, the way your presence reorganizes an environment's energy, that reveals your difference before you ever say anything. They have pretended not to notice, but their body language betrays them. Pay close attention to what occurs each time you enter a place. Before you even speak, the mood alters. When you go in, they immediately go back inside. The slight stiffening in their voices when they address you, as some overcompensate by trying too hard, while others withdraw into silence as if your presence is too much for them to bear. They cannot explain it, but you can see through every single performance. That is because you exude what I call dynamic authority. This is not something you achieve by hard work, training, or acceptance from others. It is not a badge, talent, or title. It is who you are. It's programmed into your cells, active in your actions, and present in the way you interpret reality via filters that most people don't have access to. People experience this authority in the same way that a storm approaches, with atmospheric pressure altering right before lightning strikes. They perceive it on levels beyond their conscious awareness. Some brace themselves for impact, attempting to protect the delicate walls of their existence, while others lean into the lightning, realizing that being near you may ignite a metamorphosis they've silently wished for. The recognition is not intellectual. It is primordial. It bypasses the rational mind and strikes them in the brain's earliest section, where they intuitively know how to distinguish between predator and prey, leader and follower. Catalyst is a background character. That is why they respond as they do. Understand this. When they ask you to clarify yourself, it is not because they don't understand. It's because your presence without explanation is too strong for them to handle safely. If you're not explaining yourself, if you're not reducing your reality to a size that they can neatly file away, you're simply being, and that unsettles them. Your presence compels people to examine everything about their own life. When you stop justifying your point of view, refuse to defend your decisions, and stop shrinking yourself just to fit through the doorways of their understanding, you transform from something they can dismiss with a casual, "Oh, they're just different," to something they must reckon with. You cease being a jigsaw piece that they can fit into their world and instead become a totally new environment that forces them to adapt or retreat. And this is the most terrifying aspect for them. Those who demand answers the most are often the ones who feel your authority the most strongly. Deep down, they know that if they can get you to explain, you will unwittingly reveal the map. A step-by-step analysis of how you become who you are. But the fact is that the map does not exist. You did not become this. You've disclosed it. You dug it out from behind layers of conditioning, programming, and false identities that were never genuinely yours. They're still wandering around with that conditioning on, mistaking their masks for their true faces, whilst you've removed yours and stood in the rawness of your sincerity. And this is something they'll never confess. You cannot educate someone to be like you any more than fire can teach water to burn. They either contain the components or do not. The repeated requests for you to explain yourself are disguised screams of despair. Give us the recipe for becoming what we are frightened to find inside ourselves. They do not want your narrative. They want your spirit and blueprint. But essence is not transportable, and bravery cannot be borrowed. You've always known things without realizing how you knew them. You enter situations with downloads of truth that others would need hours, days, or even years to obtain via study and observation. You can feel the truth vibrating underneath the falsehoods. You can taste the secret gold beneath the pleasant grin. You decipher the true communication going behind the spoken words. And yet, you've spent far too much of your life attempting to explain this to people who don't believe their 5 basic senses, much alone the unidentified ones you use. How do you explain to someone that you can sense intense emanating from their body like heat signatures? How can you put it into words such that you can read the complete tale of their energy before their lips opens to provide the neatly trimmed version? How can you explain that? You don't just hear what people say. You can hear the pause between their statements, the dissonance between what they reveal and what they hide. The reality is, you cannot. And you don't have to, since your life was never intended to be a step-by-step guide for others. You aren't here to offer them the formula. You are here to embody the prospect of reminding them that honesty cannot be learned. It has been uncovered. And if they genuinely want to know what you know, if they need the freedom they see in you, they'll have to stop asking you for instructions and start digging themselves. This is not intuition, at least not as they have been trained to interpret it. This is something deeper, basic, and resides at the operating system level of who you are. While most individuals operate on fundamental programming that states, see the surface, believe the surface, respond to the surface, you're functioning on a whole different code. Your inner system is intended to handle considerably more than what is initially obvious. You get information from the past, present, and future at the same time, weaving together emotional, cerebral, and spiritual material, as well as perhaps a dozen additional realms of life that human language has yet to fully comprehend. You're not just picking up on surface clues. You're reading the whole matrix of human interaction like it's code scrolling in front of you. That is why you predict what people will do before they do it. That's why you may sense betrayal weeks before it emerges physically. That's why you can see opportunity when others see tragedy. However, when you attempt to communicate this to individuals who live in the prison of prove it, they want evidence, reasoning, receipts, and proof expressed in the language of their constrained reality. They want you to present your work as if life were a math problem with step-by-step computations. However, you do not get solutions by solving linear equations. You travel there with quantum jumps that leave no trace. You just know. And that understanding has been verified so many times by reality that you believe it more than the common consensus. Everyone other promises to. Still, you felt compelled to excuse it, to tone things down, to make it appealing to people who will never comprehend. Because some of us did not come here to pursue the traditional pathways of learning. We come here to transcend them. Perhaps you've been deemed too sensitive. They murmur it as if it were a weakness, as if it were a defect that you should fix. They don't comprehend, however, that your so-called sensitivity is simply the apparent tip of a large, complicated sensing system. You are not overly sensitive. You are exactly calibrated. You can detect frequencies to which they have been accustomed. You're the seismograph, sensing vibrations miles before the earthquake is detected on their equipment. You are the weather vane that rotates before the storm clouds come. While they're still discussing whether the earth is trembling, you've already left the building, and when it falls, they turn back and accuse you of being fortunate. Alternatively, insist that you explain how you know. But how can you transmit a knowledge that is not limited by their language? How can you describe something that exists outside their 5 senses, scientific frameworks, and logic-based validations? Some facts cannot be presented to individuals who only believe what they can touch. They desire words. They want steps. They want formulae. However, not all truths are meant to be expressed in words. They are lived, embodied, and felt by those who bear them. That's where your power starts to manifest. Because when you stop explaining, When you stop attempting to make your reality edible for others who are devoted to misinterpreting it, something significant happens. You begin to move silently. However, this stillness does not indicate defeat or retreat. This is not someone's quiet after being silenced. This is the quiet of someone who no longer asks permission to operate at full capacity. This is the quiet of someone who trusts their own knowledge more than anybody else's approval. It is the stillness of self-sovereignty. You cease conducting mental committee meetings to predict how people will respond to your actions. You cease practicing defense statements for options that do not need a defense. You no longer apologize for living your life to the fullest. You cease recounting your every action in order to make others feel safe about your growth. And at that instant, your silence takes on its own language, speaking louder than any explanation ever could. And silence frightens them more than your words, reasoning, or even your presence. Silence is unarguable. Silence is unshakable. Silence cannot be discussed, probed, or rejected. Words may be distorted. Explanations may be questioned. However, there is quiet. Silence gives them nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to oppose. There is nothing to control. And when you move silently, you become unpredictable. You become unmanageable. You become uncontrollable. This is when they discover the reality they never wanted to confront. You are no longer inside their frameworks. You have strayed outside of their expectations. You have overcome the necessity to describe your development in their language. And the moment you stop explaining, you transform from an argumentable oddity to a force to be reckoned with. Your quiet isn't empty. It's density. It bears weight. It resonates with presence. It compels individuals to face themselves in ways they previously avoided. It shakes the basis of their confidence. Because your silence reflects back to them the boundaries of their own comprehension. They hoped that your words would compress you into something safe. They wanted your explanations to include you. However, when you stop explaining things to them, you stop creating barriers to keep you in. You become limitless. You become untouchable. You become unavoidable. That, more than anything else, is why your quiet is your most powerful tool. And that is precisely what they have been attempting to avoid with their constant requests for answers. Their continual asking is motivated by anything other than curiosity. It's all about control. They want to know what you're doing, why, how, and where you're headed. Not so they can comprehend you, but so that they can position themselves appropriately. If they understand your movements, they can shadow you, copy you, compete with you, or, at the absolute least, get out of your way before you reveal how vulnerable their positions are. Your openness is their advantage. Your explanations are their strategy handbook. Every word you say to them is ammo. However, when you stop announcing your movements and become mute about your method, you deprive them of that power. You leave them standing in the dark, fumbling, attempting to piece together shards of how you jumped from point A to point Z without ever disclosing point B or why quiet is where your power dwells. Throughout history, the most powerful spirits have used silent movement as their method. It is fundamentally understood by rulers, prophets, mystics, and revolutionaries. That explanation is a fantasy that justifies creation as weakness, and that the desire to understand is nothing more than a cage. A cage that you create and then pass off to others with the key still hanging in the lock. When you cease explaining your differences, defending your ideas, and lowering your energy in order to obtain the superficial comprehension of those who thrive on uncertainty, something transformational occurs. You cease playing their game and instead become the game itself. They cannot influence you with guilt. They can't imprison you with judgment. They cannot dominate you with their opinions. You slide out of the classifications. They want to trap you within. You become force rather than create motion or explain outcome, rather than theory. And see what happens when you do this. See how the world transforms when you stop answering the urgent query. Why are you like this? Instead, live it so forcefully that the question becomes meaningless. They will no longer question why. They'll scurry to catch up as you see them change from ignoring your differences to emulating your behavior, from challenging your techniques to analyzing your outcomes, from disputing your approach to urgently attempting to extract some formula that they can employ for themselves. But by the time they realize what's going on, you'll be so far gone that all they'll see are shadows and echoes of who you used to be. And while they're busy studying your previous footsteps, you'll have evolved into something they can't understand. That is the beauty of it. Your inexplicable existence is not merely a mystery. It is a threat, a live, breathing disturbance to every carefully built identity around you. Just by standing is unmistakable evidence that authenticity does not need permission, that freedom does not need approbation, that power does not need translation. Every time you come up without apologizing, explaining, or minimizing yourself, you create a mirror that reveals the illusions they've been living. You underline how much energy they use on preserving masks and identities, as well as practicing shows in which you no longer participate. The underlying fact is that when you stop explaining, you cease providing them things to hold on to. You cease offering them the blueprint for your internal architecture. You stop creating your own handbook. They can research and duplicate. Without explanation, you are impossible to comprehend. Without reason, you cannot be contained. They can't argue against your quiet since it isn't empty. It is hefty. Silence carries weight. Silence resonates with presence. It remains in the room long after you depart. Unsettling, undeniable. It cannot be disputed, analyzed, or ignored. This is why your silence frightens them more than your words could. Because words may be manipulated, reasoning can be questioned. Explanations may be rejected. However, there is quiet. They cannot fill the hole created by silence. It compels people to face themselves. It depicts the difference between their performance and your honesty, or between their illusion and your truth. And in that moment, they discover the most terrifying reality of all. You're no longer playing their game. Your quiet movement demonstrates that you have transcended the frames in which others exist. You're not following the expected path they have been trained to follow. You are going in leaps, spirals, and dimensions that they cannot trace. You are no longer a character in their tale. You have become your own author. When you stop explaining, you enter the rarest kind of authoritative present without consent. Power without apologies. Transformation occurs without translation. And this is the conundrum that plagues them. The less you explain, the more undeniable you are. The less you rationalize, the more people want to comprehend. The little you divulge, the more obsessed they get. You are no longer something they can label. You are something they must deal with, and reckoning with you pushes them to confront themselves. That is why your quiet is not just the absence of sound. It's a restrained tempest, an unsaid revolution, and a power that shapes reality without moving a finger. That is why, when you stroll through a real city and refuse to explain or apologize, you don't simply exist, you lead. That's what performing is. An illusion. The theatrical production was based around practiced lines and carefully selected masks. And it's the illusion you've already walked away from, while others continue to cling to their scripts and practice the same monotonous lines in front of mirrors. You've left the stage totally. You've stopped acting and begun living. This is why you are dangerous. That is why you are the mirror they cannot bear to look at. Because when people look at you, they don't see just themselves. So they notice the masks they've pasted on their flesh. You reveal the costumes, props, and phony backgrounds. You make the whole theater seem vulnerable. That is why they want explanations from you. They don't just want to know why you're different. They need you to explain it. Because if you can defend your differences, they can also justify their similarities. If they can attribute your distinctiveness to a terrible backstory, a disease, or a handy explanation, they won't have to face themselves. They want your freedom to be accompanied with a hurt. They want your power to leave a scar. They want your authenticity to be the result of agony, so they can keep reminding themselves how fortunate they are to be normal. But what frightens them is when there is no wound, no reason. When your differences are the consequence of choosing rather than brokenness. Because if you're not damaged, their compliance can't be justified as survival. If you are entire, their obedience is not the same as knowledge. Betrayal. Your entire presence, uncontested, medically whole, and unexplained, implies that they cannot stand to confront it. Perhaps it isn't you who is hurt, but them. Perhaps the years they've spent twisting themselves into forms to match the crowd, stifling their own voice in order to blend in. Maybe it is the true brokenness. Your wholeness is a living accusation. Every time you come up as yourself, without apology, explanation, or compromise, you show them how little they are. You show how much they have shrunk. You show how much they've given up simply to belong in a world that doesn't even love them back. You are evidence that the jail they call normal is based on fear. You going freely is like strolling through a jail without shackles while everyone else compares chain lengths. They want to hear how you become free. They want an explanation, a handbook, a step-by-step strategy. But the reality that you bear is inexplicable because you did not break any shackles, construct tunnels, or conduct a spectacular escape. You just noticed the doors were never locked. You noticed the shackles were made of something other than steel. They were smoke made of other people's ideas, expectations, and judgments. When you stopped believing in their existence, the bonds dissipated like morning mist. Try conveying this to someone who still believes their shackles are made of unbreakable metal. This is the most terrifying fact. You are not different because of what happened to you. You are different because you have stopped allowing things to happen to you. You stopped being a passenger in your own life. You stopped delegating your authority to other people's choices. You stopped delegating your decisions to the culture of compliance. You stopped believing the myth that their world was the only one. And that type of agency, radical ownership of your life, may be something they are unable to embrace because it reveals their imprisonment as choice. Think about it. Your existence demonstrates that the prison walls aren't real, that the locks they dread are illusions, and that the bars they hold so firmly are composed of words and fears rather than iron. And this is what shocks them to the core. Because if freedom was always accessible, what is their justification for not seizing it? If you are not broken, what does this indicate about how others have broken themselves in order to conform? If you're whole without explanation, their whole sense of normalcy falls. Your quiet, totality, and reluctance to explain speak louder than any words you could ever provide. Because showing up without an apology makes their outfits appear like chains. You make their comfort resemble prison. You make their similarity seem like submission. That is why they insist on hearing your narrative, your motive, and terrible explanation. Because if you don't offer them one, they'll have to confront the reality. You are free because you choose to be, and they are trapped because they have chosen not to be. That is why you are the most disruptive presence in the room. Not because you shouted, not because you argued, not because you strive to prove yourself, but because you don't, because you just are. And being without an apology or explanation unravels the act. They mistook it for reality, and your sheer presence demonstrates that it is decision, not circumstance, that keeps them locked. Here's something they don't want you to know. When you stop explaining yourself, you become magnetic in ways that explanation never could. The mystery of your unexplainable uniqueness creates a gravitational pull that attracts what feeds you and repels what empties you. You develop selective appeal, excluding inquisitive observers who merely want to gawk from a safe distance, while attracting those who recognize themselves and your reluctance to shrink. Every explanation you provide is a map, and maps may be followed by anybody, even people who aren't on your trip. However, when you stop explaining, you become a frequency that only certain individuals can hear, a signal that only compatible souls can perceive. This is not about secrecy or withholding. It is about understanding that your energy talks louder than words ever could. The proper individuals will understand you via resonance rather than explanation. You've been attempting to create bridges with folks who are determined to remain on their side, providing comprehensive explanations for why you had to establish your own island rather than drowning in theirs. However, adversaries may cross bridges just as readily as friends, and each explanation adds another plank to a bridge that may never have been in the first place. Some lengths are intended to last. Some distinctions are designed to last. And not everyone gets to see the architecture of your soul just because they want to know why you're created differently. The magnetic impact of unexplained variations. Natural selection in your relationships. Those who cannot tolerate not understanding you fade away. Those who need you to be containable. Find someone else to control. And what remains are the unusual ones. The spirits that respect you without having to examine you. The people who can be in your presence without having to solve you. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the development of my faith. Please let me believe you even when there is no tangible proof. Let me believe in your eternal presence, knowing that you will never hurt me. I realize that your intentions for me are ones of success rather than harm, in order to provide me with a bright future. Thank you, kind and everlasting Father, for always hearing my voice. I give this prayer to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provisions. I am thankful for your presence in my life and the richness you provide. If this video spoke to you, please subscribe to the channel and share it with others who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your trip and how you're getting ready for your own victorious homecoming. If you would want to help us out, please consider donating via Buy Me a Coffee. This allows us to consistently improve our content in order to provide you with the best possible experience. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No present is too tiny. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity spreads God's message and gives people hope. Do not stop here. Watch our next video for amazing insights into the indications that indicate you are the chosen one. We've loved sharing this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for sticking with us until the finish. Keep shining brightly and face your fate with confidence. See you next time. The God Connection sends its blessings to all lovely individuals.